So welcome everybody, it's the Shaman coming at you now, just wanting to introduce amazing guest, Andreas.
Thank you.
And I worked with Andreas a while ago, what was it, 2 years ago or a year ago now?
2 years ago.
It's amazing, hey? 2 years has just gone past like so quick.
It's like yesterday.
Yes, like yesterday. So, and I was walking down the street in Barcelona, and who should I see but the man himself? And I thought, well, might as well have a chat. And we figured, well, we'll turn this into an opportunity to have an interview because Andreas has had an interesting path of moving towards men's coaching as well as his own path of liberation. So I thought it was a very rich opportunity to have a conversation that would be useful for probably a lot of guys out there that are listening. And this is going to be a bit freestyle, so we'll just see what comes up. But ultimately, I really wanted to just explore this idea of masculinity, liberation, and the path of what it means to be an evolving man in 2019, which probably pretty soon will be 2020, and then who knows what. So welcome to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's been interesting 2 years since then, since we met for the first time. What I can say about my journey is, like, I would say I experienced the both extremes of how not to do it before. Mm-hmm. So you could call me like a typical nice guy, which I've been before for a really long time. And part of this, of course, is good. It's beneficial, right? Because being very empathetic, there's nothing wrong. But then I kind of like was on the path where I was searching and looking for my masculinity. So I went to join the military, not specifically out of that reason, but I found it very interesting and adventurous. But what I did, and I stayed there for 10 years.
Wow, it's a huge investment, yeah.
Yeah, and what I tried is I noticed that afterwards, that I tried to put some masculinity upon myself, like stack another layer. Because I felt like to balance out this nice guy behavior with some boldness and some manliness, and I felt pretty manly in the military, right?
Sure.
But at the end, that led to a breakdown, that led to a depression, to a burnout, and I didn't even understand where this came from in the first place. But a couple of years later, when I went through therapy and different evolving steps, and also with TNL, like I understood like what I was doing. I was trying to pretend to be someone that I was not.
Yeah.
And that was obviously very unhealthy, and I felt like shit.
Yeah.
So what happened since we met, or especially since we met, actually a little bit before, because I learned about NLP and all this stuff, is that I wanted to have a healthy balance. And I was looking for the answer to what is actually inside of myself. How much masculinity is there, like true masculinity? And what is there that I need to accept in order to become or return back to the person that I actually am.
Well, it's a very rich path, and I think in many ways like a hard-won path.
Yeah.
So that's also part of the reason that I was really interested to talk to you, because I think there's some guys who can relate to your story, and there's probably a lot of younger guys who would really get a lot of value from listening to this story.
Yeah.
I mean, this journey that you've been on, and I can relate in my own version too, of maturing through time against the odds, really, is something that I think a lot of men are looking for some understanding around. So, yeah, I think opening up that pathway that you're talking about is such a powerful thing. And I guess I'm interested because, like you said, coming from a background where you were in a very masculine role, like doing a military job and being somebody and also you were into fitness and training, so there's kind of like a lot of kind of hyper masculine ideals in a way. So that was like one way of doing things, but there was something missing, right?
Yeah.
So, and tell me a little bit more about that, because I'm interested to hear about like, what did you find that was missing, and how did you sort of start to like find your way back from, I guess, an illusion of your masculinity to more of a well-grounded and genuine form of masculinity?
Well, there are some specific things that I noticed about my own behavior, because in the military and also in this personal training thing that I started afterwards, I was always kind of acting inside of a rigid system. Like military obviously is a rigid system, and then this personal training thing is like a community in itself as well, where you have to be tough and strong and bold and stuff. But I was always acting and playing and never felt like real. So every time, to break it down specifically, every time there would be a situation of confrontation, I would use my authority that I have, but not a natural authority, but something that I was allowed to have through the system. For example, when I was like training my soldiers in military tactics or whatever, and somebody would like disagree with something, I would say, well, what you have to, right? Because I'm a man, you're not, right? And I would use it, and they have to do it because the system allows me to do that.
Right.
So there was not this. There was trust from the people, yes, because of my empathy that I was using, but there was never this, when it came to a conflict, I was never able to bring up this natural authority to tell them, look, this is important, and I tell you that, and blah, 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 so that they feel that I have this authority in me. And I was kind of neglecting that fact, and I was like, well, that works for me, right? I say you do, they do. I say jump, they say how high. That's it. But at the end, it felt unhealthy. And there were many of these occasions that I collected along the way. I felt like, fuck, afterwards, like after this confrontation or this conflict, I never felt strong. I didn't even feel strong in the moment.
Right.
I just noticed, well, they do because they have to, but not because they respect me.
Right.
In some occasions. And that kind of made me sad, and also that made me think, like, where can I find it? And it's actually hard to find. I think it found me at the end. I found it through, like, the first step would be taking a therapy after my depression phase when I left the military.
Just to pause quickly, did you feel like depressed because your authority was taken away from you, or you didn't have a position after you left the military, or what do you feel that depression was arising out of?
No, the depression came actually from a point where I felt that I'm fenced in a rigid structure, and I could not use my creativity, and I cannot evolve in the system.
Okay.
So I had many ideas. I wanted to make people grow, and I wanted to lift them up and to build something stronger, but the system would not allow it. So I was gaining more and more responsibility to do stuff, and that fucked me up. So I had too much work with the false authority and repressing my creativity, and all these things came together, I think. That's my explanation for it.
So it sounds like a kind of misalignment of values, like not understanding how to express your true values, or it's been something I've been exploring personally myself, actually, like, because we have our healthy values and what's good for us, and then we have the values that we're kind of forced to do because of circumstances in survival.
Sure.
And sometimes we have to balance them. Or there's also an interesting thing where sometimes our values that we've been using to get somewhere, for example, when you first joined the military, that might have been effective at that stage, but then after a period of time, 10 years is a long time, your personality grows, your identity grows, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, just being this guy is not fulfilling to me anymore. And then there's a kind of an identity shift or a value shift that needs to happen. So once again, I just wanted to highlight that because I think that's a key point that a lot of guys need to kind of understand in a little bit more detail, is the idea of values and being in alignment with values, and how being out of alignment with values can cause like a fuckload of pain inside yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's a important takeaway from this video, from this chat, is like, be very aware of what's happening inside. This disconnection from yourself creates this suffering, where you're going in some direction, and that's tricky, right? You have the idea of, well, that's pretty okay what I do here, because I like the job, for example, right? But I was not knowing that I was running into the wrong direction, and my body showed me at the end.
Yep.
So the earlier and the more you can be aware of what's really going on inside of you, the more you reduce the suffering in the end. Right? Like once you notice something about your situation that is not cool, you feel like, actually I want to do something else, listen to that voice and try different things and go different ways. And it's so weird to me to think back, because I was actually also training guys to stay calm in high dangerous situation, life-threatening situation. And I was able to do that. I was able to teach them, and I was able to give some value within the system.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was suffering by not being able to stay calm and walk my way that I really wanted to.
Wow. Yeah. That sounds very powerful. So to continue with your story, because that's interesting. So then you started to break out of that. You said you found some therapy and a way forward. And what happened with that phase? You sort of got some new frameworks, or you started to question things in a deeper way, or what shifted after the depression phase?
Actually, now I think it was very healthy that my body forced me, like for a half year, I could not even like sit more than 15 minutes on a laptop and work. I still wanted to do something. I wanted to create. I was always like that, but I couldn't. So I was forced to just take walks, to just do nothing, to think, to write journal, talk with therapists, talk with friends. And this is where I also found, like, who are the friends who are beneficial. I really want to know about me, who really are also investing and helping and supporting, and who are not. And on this path, I tried different things. It was more or less, personal training, and then also slightly got into coaching. This was the first time where I felt like, well, here's a situation where I can use my creativity and where I can use my empathy as well, and I don't have to suppress this part, this so-called nice guy part, right? But the empathy is cool, as long as it's balanced out with the masculinity that's also there and that also wants to come out. So the personal training part was okay because it was more of a balance, and more of my qualities and values and things that I was able to give were able to come out. I was not quite there. This is why I quit it last year. But it was more the right way. Right? So step by step, I kind of digged myself out of this unconscious walking in many directions. More as like, okay, I don't like this, cut it off. I don't like this, cut it off. And also, I think I got more brave in doing and making these decisions. Before, I was more or less like staying inside of my comfort zone, like, yeah, I would like to do that, but, well, how do I earn money then? I would like to get rid of these friends, but, well, who should I talk to then? Right? I tried to keep stuff. And then I was like, fuck that shit. I'm not going to run into this situation like ever again, because I felt like at some point I'm even killing myself. And so from that point on, after the therapy and after making new experiences, I was more brave to make strong decisions and to follow up.
Yeah. Interesting. So, I mean, that says a lot too. I mean, what it brings up in my mind is a lot of things actually. So I'm thinking about the fact that, like, as men and as humans really, but as men in particular, we need to find a way, right? We need to have a way to live, to survive, and also a way to like express ourselves. And especially if you're like kind of somebody who has, let's say, a more sensitive or expressive nature, somebody who likes to operate a little bit outside of the box of, just the norm. Because some people are kind of happy with following like a lot of routines and traditional patterns, whereas some people have a need to kind of move outside of those structures. And I would say that, for guys that are wanting and needing to move outside of those structures, that there is this kind of calling that's happening. But then the hard part is, how do we answer that calling? So it sounds like, you've had that calling come to you, and in many ways against the odds, or at the same time it was kind of calling you through a series of even initiations, right? And they're kind of quite literal initiations. It's like, you be the warrior, okay? And then from the warrior, let's like, become the lover. So you're kind of moving into these different phases, which I think is very powerful. So what I was thinking is like, that's a very, very powerful path to find orientation in the world. And I think there's a tricky thing that happens inside of us where we're trying to find orientation in this unconsciousness, like you said. And there's a weird feedback loop, because in some ways it makes me curious too sometimes about like, where does that desire and orientation really come from? As in, like, there's a part of you that's pulling you forward, maybe from a higher place, but then there's also like a part of you that's in the field, in reality, in whatever's going on, and trying to work it out as you're moving forward. And it's a very fascinating kind of combination of bringing those two, the calling and the reality, together slowly. And then, like you said, manifesting, and I can relate to that myself, like manifesting your intention to evolve through, let's say, like higher expressions. So moving from a 9-to-5 or military job to a more, okay, now you're an entrepreneur, you're operating on your own terms, but there's still something that could sort of shift a little bit. And I'm interested to hear what you got to say about that. And then I'm also interested to hear about, and then what was next, because obviously then you made another jump to an even higher level.
One thing that I learned, it's more important to learn how you navigate on this road. It's not, for me, it's not about learning, this is the right way, because probably it isn't. I accepted that, and I went down many roads. And that's okay. So what I feel about it, or my picture in my head, is at the beginning you're on a crossroad and you have like 10 or 12 or 20 different ways to walk. You don't know which one is right, and you have no feeling because you don't really know yourself when you, let's say, in the beginning of your 20s, right? You don't know it. So the only choice that you have is like, choose one path, walk down and see if it leads to happiness or not. That's what I did many, many times, and maybe many of you as well, and many of us do this, and that's the only way to find out. But that sounds a little bit like, well, there's crossroad after crossroad after crossroad with 10 or 12 different roads, but it's not like that. It's like the amount of roads, they are reducing. Because I have the feeling like every time I come to one of these crossroads, there are less ways. Or at least if there are many, some of them are gray and some of them are more teasing, because you know more about yourself and you can make more precise decision about where you want to go. And it doesn't really matter if you ask me if it comes from here or if it comes from a higher place. Maybe it's a combination of both. But that's the interesting thing about the journey, right? To find out which way to go, and that gets easier and easier, I think, because you learn more about yourself. And then the next step is to find out, okay, where is this force inside of myself that drives me? And then learn how to make use of it to have even better decisions and to go towards more happiness and more fulfillment, more purpose even. Yeah.
So I mean, I like to think of that in terms of like on track or off track, or even high vibration, low vibration kind of signals. You know, so you can start to develop your intuition about how you're tuning the world around you. And I think that's tricky too, in some sense, because it's a constant process of learning to align with yourself in some ways.
Yeah.
And I think, like, it can be, like you said, which is it's amazing sometimes, you know, like your job was literally to train soldiers to orient themselves through reality, yet there was a thing inside you that was trying to work out how to do the same thing metaphorically, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that that's a good kind of example of the process that we need to go through to find our way, is, you know, getting this orientation. And I'm curious, I guess, yet again, about like how has that then evolved? Because it's still evolving for you and getting more and more on track,
Sure.
and finding your way. And like, how do you see that path unfolding for you lately?
It's like the recent months were like really troublesome, I'd say, because I made some strong decisions, and that's even interesting. I think, like the harder the path, the faster the growth. So me moving from one country to another, and then trying to step my foot on the ground in a different city and learn the rules of a different country, and then also forming my business and working with new clients and all this stuff. That was a hard time in the beginning, but now I enjoy it so much. And I think I'm kind of hardening myself in a good way, not forcing myself through something, but on this path you get a lot of rejections. Actually, it's like very relatable also to seduction and other stuff, right? You get a lot of rejections and you get a lot of roadblocks on the way that you overcome, and you have to overcome, because there's no plan B. At least for me, in this phase of my life, there's no plan B, because I'm absolutely focused for this phase of my life what I want. Yeah. And once you learn that these blocks are just like challenges, and this is why my business is called My Next Challenge, actually. Without knowing, I named it 5 years before, right?
It's amazing what we call to ourselves, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And once you learn that you are way more powerful than you thought before, then you grow stronger, and you be more relaxed, you will be more happy, and that's what's happening right now. And it's more, I can sense it more in the small moments than in the big wins or losses. It's more the moment where you talk to someone, and it's an important, let's say, a sales call, and you're like, oh, okay, done this shit before. You just say no, there's going to be another one who says yes. Or in seduction, when you talk to a very beautiful girl, it's more that you go like, well, I've done this shit before, right? You relax into it. And even if it's a new thing that you've never done before, it's like, you know that the first couple of tries maybe will suck, and you feel a little bit bad afterwards, but you overcome it, and you get more like a view of the process, and you can plan more long term and relax into the process. That makes it more enjoyable, even though it's hard at some point.
Yeah. And I think that's part of like the underlying like foundation of masculinity, in terms of like an orientation of being able to be resilient in the face of challenge, and also to be a problem solver.
Yeah.
But at the same time, maybe even more powerful than a problem solver is to be a creator. Because I think a big part of where we get caught up, and this is myself included, is that we get so caught up in detail sometimes, we can get focused on problems, and then before we know it, we're sort of stuck in the quagmire of like challenge. And then sometimes we need to remember, like, what am I really trying to do here? Like, what's the outcome? Who am I really becoming in the process? Like, what is the energy of myself as the creator, as opposed to who I am as the reactor to like all these challenges? And sometimes in like instant, you can start to move your mind towards much more of a resource-based orientation, an outcome-based orientation. And being in my world, because I have, obviously coaching a lot of guys, and I'm constantly on this kind of my own version of, I guess, a kind of a mission of sorts, in the sense of I'm trying to find a way through a lot of confusion, both for myself and for the world.
Yeah.
And I sense that something that, to speak a little bit about my history, because I think it helps complement your story a little bit. I came from a history where there was not a lot of stability around me for various reasons. So I learned at a young age that the best thing to do was to rely on myself, and to be responsible for myself. And there was good and bad to that. I mean, the good side of that is that I learned to really, I guess, contain my needs and to take care of my needs as best as possible. The downside of that was, I think, that it left me in a position where I didn't often have a lot of external orientation assistance. So I had to kind of work out how to move through the world. But what that taught me ultimately was that, very similar to what you're saying, and I think this is why this is really important as a universal idea for guys to connect with, is I started to have to tune into my own signals and my own intuition about stuff. And at some point, I had to fall back on something. And I guess in some ways I'm falling back on a little bit of a moral framework, like a feeling base. But at the same time, that feeling base is also based on, what's possible. And I had to go through various challenges, which I still am, to be leaning into the chaos and to be sort of feeling what's happening inside of that chaos, and what can I see that I couldn't see before when I allow myself to just push a little bit more, to dream a little bit more, to trust a little bit more. And sometimes that's not comfortable, because that's the paradox too, right? I think it's hard to recognize that, in some ways we want to feel good and we don't want to feel bad, but to grow we need to feel uncomfortable. Yet at the same time as feeling uncomfortable, we need to feel that we're at least on a path of something meaningful.
Yeah.
So there's the what do they say? I'm sure you know the quote. It's is it pain is inevitable but suffering's a choice, or something like that? It's a bit of a cliche, right?
Yeah.
In the sense
but
that
it fits, right?
Yeah, so I think being able to move through life with these kinds of awarenesses that are helping us to raise ourselves up through the process, and find those orientation mechanisms. Like I said, so for me that started with also starting to challenge the stories that I'd been told, in the sense that I didn't believe that just going to school and getting a job and going to university and doing the things that I'd been kind of offered in the catalogue of the mainstream society was going to solve my problems. So in some sense I chose a much harder road, which was going to forge my own way, and that started with healing and body work. And I mean that's a pretty sort of standard path to a degree, but then I realized that was not going to help me, even though that was a better option than being stuck in a supermarket, which I'd done plenty of as well, working in shitty jobs and working hospitality and being a cleaner and doing all this shit jobs that you got to do to survive. So being a healer was better for me, because I could think in more holistic ways. I could help people. I could offer my services. I enjoyed the fact that I was very engaged with and stimulated with different models of reality. But at some point, same thing, I thought, I've got to go deeper than this. I really want to help people, and I also want to go deeper in my own journey, which led me to communication and coaching, and then ultimately to the pickup scene, which in my focus in that scene is really to actually help men through more or less therapy, really. Yeah. But it's interactive in-field therapy, which I think you can relate to that
Absolutely.
as well. So maybe let's talk about that a little bit in terms of how this path that we're kind of both on, in terms of finding our way through this chaos of reality, has led us to men's coaching, working with understanding ourselves in relationship to society and women, and how that has kind of showed up for you.
Sometimes I perceive this as kind of like a thing that annoys me, right? There are not so many things these days that really knock me off balance. But there's this one thing that we all know that we've been on this path for a long time, that behind seduction and pickup, there's a huge lot of things more, a huge pile of things more to discover and to learn about yourself. And it's more like when I talk about seduction and pickup with my clients, it's more about what else can you see? What else can you see inside of yourself when you expose yourself to this pressure and expose yourself to this very moment where you're so afraid of doing something or talking to someone or taking action, taking the next step. Because and that's hard to market, right? And I'm not talking about like, I'm not complaining that it's hard to market, but it's like I want to shout it into the world that this is such an amazing path for your overall growth, not only in connection with women, but in connection with yourself. And that's the more beneficial thing. But you cannot market like that. So you have to be a little bit more superficial for people to say like, yeah, I want that girl. I want more women in my life. I want more sex. And nothing bad about it, but that's just the surface, right? Once you took a glance behind the curtain and experience yourself under pressure, which many of the guys that we're working with never really did. Right? That's the first time they speak to a stranger, maybe. Right? And I remember how it was for me when I learned about this stuff. It's hard to do. But it's the same thing. Like diamonds are forged under pressure. Although it's a cliche, it's like it's so true, right? Once you took the step, before it felt like so much pressure, and you think you can't do it, and then you do it, and you feel amazing, man. And that's the start of the journey.
And that also reminds me of something very powerful as well, which is that sometimes for these guys and for a lot of us, that's the first time that we've ever had support from another man. Or support from other people to say it's okay for you to have permission to express yourself in the world without feeling judged or without feeling small or without feeling like no one's going to back you up. And which brings us to a really key point, I think, which we can kind of build on, which is so much of the challenge that I think guys face is actually like unresolved and unconscious blind spots and pain. So, for example, having a sense of fear of not being accepted, a fear of not being worthy, a fear of not being loved, a fear of not being capable. And then, of course, so I think in many ways that's why, you know, the marketing about getting chicks and getting laid and, you know, being an alpha male works so well, because to the unresolved trauma, that feels like a really good thing, right?
It feels like nurturing. I want that.
Exactly.
And sorry to interrupt you, but in a way it is, right? Because when you, even on a superficial level, when you manage to go on a date with a girl and have an amazing connection, interaction, maybe even get laid, right? And have amazing sex with her, or even if just like a short sexual experience, right? That can give so much energy to you, right? It's not a bad thing to go out there and just to have a quickie or something, or a one-night stand, right? That can bring a lot of energy, so it's not always this wrong way. It's just, I think, on the long run, not healthy just to focus on that, because that's kind of like staying on a superficial level and neglecting what else beautiful things are underneath that.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think because on this path that we're all on of like moving and trying to make the most out of our lives, we're looking for resources, we're looking for ways, we're looking for tools to make sense of reality. And I think that's a very deep primal part of our human nature, because for a very, very long time, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years, we've been like trying to solve simple problems. I'm hungry, I need to eat, you know, therefore I need to hunt, therefore I need to go out and I need to do this thing. Or I'm horny, therefore I need to fuck I need to go out and find a woman, I need to do these kinds of things. So like, there's a huge part of our mind, I think, which is very like outcome and maybe technically orientated, you know. It's like, what's the technical thing that I need to do, or the tactical thing that I need to do to achieve the outcome so that then I can be fulfilled. But what we often miss in the process, which I think is a deeper understanding, and I think a lot of guys are really opening to this, and this is personally my sense and intuition about the future of the field that we're in, is that men are going to be moving much more to an intuitive, holistic curiosity about what's behind that more and more. Because what I think we're seeing is like guys are coming to a lot of this kind of field of men's development and, you know, pickup, etc., because they're looking for you know, a sense of fulfillment and nurturing, and ultimately, whether they admit it to themselves or not, they're looking for love and connection. They want to feel like they're worth something and they're being loved and connected. But then often as guys start to do this path, whether it takes, you know, a few weeks or months or maybe even a few years, they get to a deeper level where they realize, there's more to this and I need to start connecting to something deeper, which brings me to the secondary point, which is, even though humans are very like tactically orientated, outcome orientated and problem solution orientated, there's another reality that's available to us when we open our mind and open our hearts to like a different kind of paradigm, let's say. So the paradigm of self-worth from intrinsic knowing of yourself. And then that's where I think a huge part of like the secondary process of the subtlety of this whole path starts to open up, of like relaxing in your body, getting to know yourself, getting to trust yourself outside of your thoughts and your feelings. You know, getting to know who you are as like a being as opposed to a doing or or a mental construct of yourself, like a personality. It's like you have a personality, but you are not necessarily just your personality. So yeah, creating, I guess, a sense of stability and strength inside yourself that comes from this alternate set of resources, which are like more intrinsic or maybe more intuitive. And in some sense, it can be hard, I think, for our conscious mind, or our let's call it like the attached mind, the addicted mind, to try and like start to trust that larger field, because sometimes it's like, yeah, but where's the magic pill? Like, what's the thing that's going to solve the problem? And I think a lot of guys often, especially in pickup, they come in with this idea that, like, if I just like get laid, or if I just learn the perfect pickup techniques, then I can get laid, and then I'll get the thing. And even if, and you know this, I'm sure, like, even if a guy has great technical game and he learns a lot of amazing seduction and he's really good at doing a lot of approaching and he's getting even a lot of great success inside of his love life, it doesn't necessarily mean that his sense of self is fulfilled. And sometimes I think it's because the deeper root of who he is and where he's coming from is not being addressed. It's not being supported.
It's this question that pops up at some point, and I would even say I think that pops up for everyone. Let's stay with your example when a guy is super technically good at picking up girls. At some point, the question will always be, well, I got that down, what now? What's the next thing? More beautiful girls? More girls? More crazy sexual experiences? Well, there will come a point where you have all these experiences, and then you go like, well, what then? Right? And then all these things that you've done, and that's dangerous actually, I think, all these things that you've experienced become kind of meaningless to you. It's like, what have I been doing this for? What did I actually give to someone else in terms of energy? What did I actually give myself? Right? So the sooner the better you should start to question, not to question the thing, but to question, what am I doing this for? What do I want out of it in a natural and authentic sense? And what is the thing that I can give to the world as well? Because I think like giving something is also very nurturing. It's a good feeling, and it's something that makes you grow in a healthy way. And that's important. But I think on the flip side of that, you will have to go through the process of doing the stuff, maybe even doing stuff technically, and then learning, but that's not satisfying, right? And then you start to, at least for me it was like that, then you start to see relationships and approaches and even sex different.
Because you still need a foundation, right?
Yeah.
You need a structural skill base.
It's always the same thing. You walk down different paths and then you go like, but that's not quite it. And then you adjust. But you only have this life. You only have maybe 60, 80, 90, 100 years maybe, right? So if you take your time with your decision, well, that's fine, but don't leave yourself too much time, because if you only do 3 decisions in your lifetime, right, you will not come very far.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm not saying here that you have to be into personal development and like become the perfect human or the perfect masculine guy. But I think the more you can find out about yourself, the more likely you will get to a point where you just enjoy life, right?
I agree a lot. And it opens up, like I said, a juicy sort of part of the conversation, I think, which is like, at some point you need to start building a narrative for yourself, right? Yeah. And that narrative can come from a lot of different sources, and it's something that fascinates me, and I work a lot with guys, because I think what I often observe anyway is guys are coming with a sense of like, I know I want to get better, and I know I don't want to be in pain, but I'm not really sure how to make that happen so much. And of course they're looking, which is part of the role that we play, they're looking for mentors, they're looking for models, they're looking for coaches, they're looking for brothers, really. They're looking for people that can mentor them through these kind of processes. And obviously there's a lot of different people that are offering things. But something that I think is not spoken about as much as I would love to see it, which is like building a real, let's say, a wholesome, proper foundation for masculinity to evolve. Because if we look at it from more of a deeper cultural perspective in the past, men in the past were honoured and seen both in roles of power and responsibility as a cultural kind of ideal, and there was a lot of mythology and support and initiation and strategies and skill sets and things that they were given to help them be strong in that position. And I think part of where we're at these days, which is a bit scary, is a lot of that stuff is kind of been has been stripped or just like confused in an ocean of noise, because there's so much other noise that's going on. And so I guess it comes down to the point of like, I think a man, and humans do, we need to develop like a narrative, and that narrative needs to be in alignment with our values and in alignment with our needs and in alignment with our ability to be able to act in the world. And in some ways, it's a massive key, because it for me, and also from when I really share that with guys, I think the narrative is the thing that gives our life meaning in a way. Like you said, to be a giver, but that's general. But to give in what way? To be a giver as a lover. So something that I've been teaching a lot recently is this idea that like you're moving into the unknown, whether you like it or not. Unknown's an intrinsic part of reality.
Sure.
So, and as we move into the unknown, you've got to face challenges, and in the face of those challenges, you need to take a position. You have to be someone. So you might as well be a warrior. But if you're going to be a warrior, then you've also got to choose a side about how you're going to be a warrior. So you might as well be a warrior that represents something powerful. And what's one of the most powerful forces, if not the most powerful force, is love. Like the power of like connection, the power of like the mystery of life, actually. And so that can be something that I think helps to orient guys, because they start to get this feeling of like, okay, I have a purpose. It is important for me to face these things. It is important for me to go through this. And then to recognize when you put yourself into a position of growth, on a path, then you need to recognize that path is going to require you to deal with difficulties, and you're going to have to negotiate those difficulties. So, like for example, both of us are working on branding and building businesses and continuing to do the work that we need to do. And of course, in that process, you have to like see an outcome. You have to like hold the vision. You have to like deal with the challenges, technical challenges, like interpersonal challenges, internal challenges, and recognizing how do I bolster myself in the face of this? How do I get around this? How do I stay on my path? And same with guys. Guys are coming into this field wanting to be better with women, and they need to recognize that you're going to be on this path of a lot of escalating challenge, and that challenge is going to actually be your ally if you can learn how to frame it well.
Yeah. I think that's a very important point. I just recently got some comments on Instagram posts that were, I would not say negative, but very like criticizing what the posts were about. So, for example, I made a post, I don't know what it exactly was, but it was somewhere around like allowing a girl to express herself and showing her that you're not judging her, so that she can open up and show her sexuality. So there's a lot of giving in it, right? So, and creating a space and doing something proactively as a man. And there was some guy commenting on it, and he said something like, what else do we need to do as a man? Isn't it enough that we're working 90% of our time for the woman? So, and I'm not want to make this ridiculous or laughing about that, right? But that shows like a misconception and a misperception maybe of the thing masculinity or our role in this world. At least that's what I think about it. It's, well, if you try to perceive it differently and you get something out of giving, that becomes a whole new thing, right? If you go like, now I have to even create a space for her to be sexually free, what else do I have to do, right? But what if this is an enjoyable thing, right? If you can, I mean, how amazing is that when you get the feeling that you have the power to open a girl or a woman up, and she trusts you, and she answers with trust, and she gives something back. It's an exchange. It's not a one-way thing, right? But you cannot allow yourself this perception when you've not walked at least a little bit of this path, of this journey. And in some way, I understand this comment under it, right? So, but it's not easy to answer. It's a little like a black and white, and you feel like you want to say like, well, you don't understand something here. But men cannot understand it when they haven't walked the path, right? So, so this is where this whole business and this whole work that we both do becomes really interesting to show men that there are more layers beneath it. And once you strip off one layer and you can look a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper, and you perceive things that you perceived as negative before become very powerful and very, very positive. And you see more connection with a woman and more more like a interaction and a power play that's very enjoyable, instead of like, what do you have to do, what do I have to do, what do I have to do to get the sex, or yeah, whatever there is, right?
Yes.
It's like changing perception to a more positive angle is it's a very important part of the journey, I guess.
Kind of reminds me, like sometimes I call it the difference between being a beggar and a king. You know, so like the beggar's walking around like, you know, can I have something? Can I get something? Can you give me something? Because, you know, I'm poor, I don't have what I need. And whereas the king's like, I have wealth, I have abundance, I have energy, I have worth, I want to share that with the world. So different kinds of orientations.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways, and it's a pretty basic way to look at it, but it's a powerful one, somewhat of a magical way to look at things, that there really is only two orientations. There's an orientation of reaction and an orientation of creation. And or another way to look at that, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, is that there's kind of like two major intelligences. And let's say like this, and I mean this is a very archetypal kind of play between like light and dark, but you've kind of got, let's call them the high vibrational intelligences and the low vibrational intelligences. And they're both trying to get what they want. You know, the low vibrational intelligences are trying to feed, they're trying to get something so that they can receive what they need to survive, essentially. But in some ways that often manifests as unhealthy behaviors, whether it be addictive behaviors, needy behaviors, self-destructive behaviors, things that are more orientated towards like I guess short-term like self-reward, but at the same time at a cost. And then you have the more, let's call them the high vibrational intelligences, which are more orientated towards bringing you into a sense of wholeness and a sense of upliftment and a sense of strength and a sense of like growth, and being able to kind of navigate those two positions, I think is a very fine art, and it reminds me, yet again, it's a bit of a metaphor, but I think it's a useful one. You kind of have to be a quite advanced hunter warrior in your own mind, in the sense that you have to, first of all, and I mean, I'd be really interested to hear your vibe on this, because I think it'd be something you'd be able to relate to. Because I've often thought about this. It's like, in some ways, humans and men are often like just these like guys that are just coming out of like a trance of unconsciousness in a territory they don't understand, and they're trying to navigate. They've got to work, because imagine, and I'm sure you know exactly, it's like, what do you do when you find yourself in somewhere you don't know where you are?
Yeah.
You have to find a direction, you have to get your bearings, you have to work out like, where am I, who am I, what's going on, and that starts to give you a position. And this is like, I think this is the base of everything, which we already talked about actually, is you've got to be aware, you've got to get into contact with like awareness, and awareness is the body, awareness is what's going on around me. You know, do I know my head from my ass? Do I know forward from backwards? And then from that orientation starts to come the secondary position of like, okay, what do I need to do now? Well, I need to survive, actually. I need to get out of the situation that's going to cause me pain, and I need to move towards a situation that's going to be sustainable or effective. And then I think that puts you into a position, or puts a guy into a position where he starts to have, even though a very basic mechanism, but it's the beginning of a sophisticated mechanism, if he can refine it, which is he can recognize, okay, these things are what's good, these things are not what's good. And as you already mentioned it very well, I think the way you spoke about it was perfect. Like, you have to kind of have experience to start to register what is on, what's off, what's healthy, what's not healthy, what's true, what's not true. Because unfortunately, no matter how many books we read, or no matter how many words we listen to, or people tell us, oftentimes we need to directly experience ourselves, or at least, which I think is another secondary path, which is powerful, at least be empathetic enough to be able to like pay a lot of attention to other people's nervous systems and learn from their nervous systems. I think there can be a lot of value in watching somebody and feeling and thinking like, I can see what the decisions they're making and where that's taking them, and is that something that would be valuable to me or not? So we can somewhat outsource our learning to others. And I think that's a form of wisdom which I think can be a more advanced thing, is when you can use your awareness to sense and be aware of other people's decisions and strategies and nervous systems, to feel how that could potentially affect you, to save you the time of fucking up, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. And it's even the ability to know and to see that there are these choices, and that there is this freedom of making these experiences. That's even the first step that many men don't even see in the beginning, right? When you're really, and that itself is like an eye-opening process, where you learn like, oh, I don't have to follow this narrative. Everything I learned, so it can be also like very confusing when you think like everything that I've done so far, is everything wrong? No, that cannot be. And that's not always the case, right? But you're starting to second guess things. You have like maybe a healthy kind of doubt about things, and then you go more like you're exploring with more awareness the outside world, so other people and also yourself.
We need to make choices in our lives, and if we don't make a lot of proactive choices, then we tend to get limited in our range. And I think this is also a physical, biological thing. It's like same with the body, right? If you just do like a very limited range of movement and limited movement, then you're going to lose the faculties of movement. And it's the same with the brain. It's the same with choices. If we don't actively pursue opening our mind and seeing who we are outside of the box of like the whatever the comfort range is, then we can potentially lose the range of adaptability, transformation, thinking, especially when you start to get a little bit more into your like the deeper parts of your path. So you make it through your 20s. Okay, you've kind of navigated a few choices, but then you hit your 30s and your 40s, and then there's a real danger that you can get really stagnant in that period. So I think that's the time when guys really need to like pick up their tools, like to start to become like that hunter warrior kind of like tracker magician, I guess, inside themselves to stay on reality and to keep intuitive. It's like this is what's going on, and the reason I want to flip it back to you and see what you think about that, but I also just want to say that like this is, in my opinion, how the modern path of male initiation is manifesting in our life now, because it's not like we go out and wrestle fucking saber-toothed tigers or something anymore, and we don't have to, but we're wrestling these ideologies, we're wrestling blind spots in our consciousness, we're wrestling the tendencies of, like you said, even with the guy in the social media, we're wrestling the tendencies in culture to try to hold us back or keep us small or stop us in some way.
I think it's a thing that we should be very aware of and very grateful for, is that we're living in a time where we don't have something or a system that writes our narrative. If we would have, at least in Europe right now, there's not a war going on. And thank you, right? So there's nothing that is so urgent to survive, right, that we needed to do, and that we would have to take on a narrative as someone who fights for his country. Like, for example, my parents, they had no choice what to think about, right? There's war, right? So the only thought is like getting food or survive or be safe, stuff like that. And even the generation after that, there was like such a strong societal rule structure. They go like, well, you go work 9 to 5 and you build a family, you build a house maybe, that's it. Well, that's how you live. And as long as you don't second guess it, can be also enjoyable at that time. But I think here's a big chance that we have, because we have this freedom and we have so much information. And we have so much access to education as well. And we can take our time to do meditation, to go out and seek for mentors and to evolve our brains. We can do a big shift to evolution itself. It's a big word, but well, we should make use of that, right? I think it's a waste of potential that people who are rather intelligent then sometimes throw away their lives because they follow like structures that they don't even like and that are not beneficial to them and not to others. So this is this is a part of what I perceive as purpose, because I'm happy and I'm glad, I'm very grateful that somebody opened my eyes. I mean, I broke down, that opened my eyes, but then also I found a lot of mentors that helped me, you included, that helped me open my eyes a bit wider and to be able to pursue things in this direction. And this is why I actually do this business. It's so rewarding for me to see people opening up and going on a journey and on a path of self-realization, but also on giving stuff and to make this world a better place. It sounds a little bit cheesy, but that's actually what we can do. We have a lot of time, we have a lot of freedom. Let's make the most out of it, right? It's not even, and then it becomes like a higher thing. It's not even only about you. It's about like you have the choice to either sit with yourself and go like, well, that's my life, or you can make use of all this great opportunities that we have and give something positive to the world. And if I can only light a little spark in some people, well, that's cool. When I at some point like pass away, I can look back and say, yeah, I shared my wisdom, yeah, or the things that I experienced, that I went through, for other people to suffer less and to live a more fulfilled life. Well, that's a good way to walk for me.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the key to a fulfilled life to a degree. And if there was part of the definition of mature masculinity, I think that would be part of it for sure.
Yeah.
And it's. I mean, we'll wrap up in a minute, but I think it really like sparks something powerful inside me, which is the fact that that we're kind of sharing this path of evolution together, and we're doing the best that we can as a species, and that there is these, let's call them tendencies, yet again low vibrational tendencies that are seeking to kind of put us into boxes and to limit us, and some of those things are actually really hectic and horrific on the planet. But there's also this other emergent beauty and higher vibrational potential, which in some sense we're all part of, like especially if we come from cultures where we have a history of, being individuals and thinking on our own terms and creating our own realities. And if we're lucky enough to come from these countries that have had an opportunity to have these levels of expression, and our ancestors had to fight and had to go through war and difficulty to get to the point where we had this level of freedom. So to remember why they fought, and to remember not because out of some glorification of suffering or war or power, but more out of an acknowledgement of the things that were well thought out and that were needed to be put into place against the odds, and even though that wasn't an easy thing to do, and to stay true to that inside of ourselves, which I think a big part of that is ultimately is to be on the side of life and evolution, and be on the side of the freedom of the individual to express, to be true, to be what they truly are.
Yeah.
And in some ways that's something that is always going to be the underdog in the face of consensus reality, because consensus reality relies on putting things in boxes, controlling things, putting things into a kind of a controlled form.
Yeah.
And for us to, as men and as individuals, to kind of stay true to our purpose of finding a way and growing and learning, and ultimately to keep coming back to the principles that are eternal, the principles that are the principles of all mature men across all time. And in some sense it comes down to an archetypal blueprint. And I think that in some ways, people don't just become amazing, they are made. You have to make yourself. And usually we make ourselves through a process, and that process is like a forging of character that comes through adversity as well as wisdom, and can bringing adversity and wisdom together into a kind of an evolutionary or initiatory kind of ordeal of some kind. And the beauty of our time and age is that we can do that in such a beautiful way by meeting women, by forging our lifestyles, and ultimately, and this is a big part of why I wanted to have you on board and to share some ideas, is because really what I'm excited about building into the future from this point forwards is an open dialogue and a conversation and a hive mind think tank of men working towards new levels of ideas, and to really, because on some level, we're mentors, we're coaches, yes, we've got businesses, we need to market ourselves, we're working with social media, we're putting ourselves in those boxes, we're shaping ourselves to what the market needs, etc., which you have to do. But at the same time, I really want to honor and be aware of the fact that we're still men, we're magicians, we're creators, we're kings, we're people beyond those limited definitions, and we need to keep channeling that into reality for the younger generations, and to also pay attention to older generations that can teach us things, so that we can take our place in a healthy chain of evolution, as opposed to potentially running the risk of becoming unconscious and losing a lot of those things that were very, very hard won against the odds. So on that note, I think it's a good sort of thing to start to wrap up, and I'm really appreciative of your words. I mean, there's so much wisdom and good ideas that we shared in your story.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and tell us a bit, because obviously you got your stuff going on. What's your website? What are you doing? What are you offering?
Yeah, well, what I'm offering is, and that's because I figured that the process takes time.
Yeah.
We're offering mentoring programs that are 12 weeks long, because we figured this is an amount of time that you can invest to really go for it. short enough to accept, well, there's going to be some heavy impact in these 12 weeks, and long enough to really make a sustainable change. So we're coaching in a workshop which is pretty condensed and intense, because obviously not everybody has the chance to spend like 3 months in Barcelona, right? So people come to us, or men come to us, to learn intensively the groundwork and the basics and the understanding in 4 days, where they like immerse themselves and put themselves into a lot of pressure, but also into a lot of learning. And so we basically open the curtain for them, right, and see what they are capable of, and we make them feel into their power and feel into their vulnerability as well, so that they come out with a lot of positive and exciting experiences to build on. And then the rest of the 12 weeks can be very much individualized. So for example, when we see after a workshop that a guy struggles with a very specific thing that he cannot address alone in his hometown, we can book an additional training day with us or with our female assistants, so that we can hammer on this specific issue. Then maybe there are guys who are a little bit more advanced and say like, "Oh, I can go alone, not alone, but I can go easy from here." And then we just go with the Skype coaching every week. This is the basic program, is the workshop and the Skype coachings, and to your personal needs and your personal schedule and budget as well, we can structure these 12 weeks to whatever you need to, at the end, make you able to express yourself in a free, mature, and healthy and authentic way, not only in connection with women, but also to improve the communication with yourself, and to take the first steps of this path.
Nice.
Right?
Yep.
It's an initiation.
Yeah, that sounds good. Sounds very much in alignment with the vision that I'm holding as well. Yeah, that's great. And website?
Website is www.my-next-challenge.com, and from there you find everything that you need. The links to our Instagram, YouTube, social media, and so on. You can always reach out to us via Skype call, so you can talk to one of our team members, even to me personally. And yeah, this is the one thing that we cannot offer, actually. We cannot offer to do the first step for you, right? So the first step, reaching out for us, this is the thing that you need to do on your own. From there on, we take your hand, we support you, we guide you, and then we give you back your hand and let you walk alone, right? And
like that.
yeah, that's what we want to do.
Nice work. All right, thanks again, man. And
Thank you.
This is the Liberated Man, and
My next challenge.
My next challenge. Signing off. Thanks for listening.